Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I didn't expect much from that dinner party, and honestly, I would have skipped it if I thought I could do so without offending my wife. Marla had insisted, gently at first. Then with that sharp edge in her tone, I knew better than to ignore. "It'll be different this time," she had promised, cupping my cheek like that would soften the memory of the last disaster at her sister's house. I didn't believe her, not entirely, but I dressed in the navy blazer she liked, combed my hair back, and showed up with a decent bottle of red tucked under my arm. Polite, presentable, trying, like always. Marla's family lived in the kind of house that looked polished even when it was messy, leather furniture, art that looked expensive without being tasteful, and walls the color of cold cream. As soon as we stepped through the door, I could feel the temperature drop, not literally, but socially. The air shifted. Eyes flicked to me and away. A few nods, nothing warm. Her mother gave me a peck on the cheek that barely grazed my skin. Her brother Warren grunted something close to a greeting and disappeared into the kitchen. And Jane didn't say anything. She just watched me, fork paused mid-salad bite, lips curled like she'd tasted something sour and was trying to place the flavor. Still, I moved through the room like I belonged there. I helped set the table, made light conversation with Helen about the weather and traffic. Marla smiled at me like she appreciated the effort, and for a moment, I thought, maybe, just maybe, it really would be different. We all took our seats. The dining room was lit by a low chandelier that cast soft golden light on everything, giving the illusion of intimacy. The meal started quietly enough: roast lamb, mashed potatoes with rosemary, glazed carrots that stuck to your teeth a little. I commented on the seasoning. Helen offered a tight smile. Jane rolled her eyes. Marla tried to steer the conversation toward harmless topics. New promotions, upcoming vacations, Helen's new garden renovation. But there was a current under it all, a tension that thickened with every course. I felt it, humming in my bones like a distant siren. When Jane refilled her glass of champagne for the third time, I noticed the tremor in her hand. Not from drunkenness. She was too controlled for that. No, this was something else. Anticipation. Containment. Like a pot about to boil over. Then dessert came out, something chocolatey and layered and entirely unappetizing to me, and just as forks began to clink against porcelain, Jane stood up. Abruptly. Like a jack-in-the-box. Her chair scraped harshly against the hardwood. She didn't lift her glass to make a toast. Didn't tap it with her fork. She simply stood there, rigid and pale and visibly shaking. Her fork pointed at me like a dagger. "Give back the gold you took from Dad's safety deposit box," she said, her voice thin but rising with each word. "We know it was you." The room froze. Even the chandelier seemed to dim in response. I looked at her, at Marla, at Warren, at Helen. No one moved. Jane's hand was still shaking. Her fork still raised. My mouth didn't open. I felt Marla's breath hitch beside me, a sound so small I might have missed it if I weren't already tuned to her like a radio. I didn't respond with a denial. I didn't plead. Instead, I slowly reached into my inner pocket, pulled out my phone, and set it carefully on the table in front of me. I unlocked it with my thumb. The silence was suffocating. Marla whispered, "Noah," but I didn't look at her. Instead, I turned the screen to face the table, tapped into the video file I had queued, and pressed play. The sound was low, but clear, the rustle of movement, the buzz of a bank lobby, the muted chime of a teller calling out the next customer. The image wasn't grainy like you'd expect. It was sharp, high-res. A man entered the frame, tall, average build, wearing a charcoal coat. His gait was slightly nervous. He looked around, glanced directly at the camera, then approached the counter. He pulled out a key. The date and time were stamped on the top right corner of the screen, 3:12 p.m., 2 days before the reading. I watched the realization ripple through the faces around the table like a slow, creeping fog. Jane's expression twisted from anger to confusion to fear in real time. Her mouth parted like she might argue, might invent some excuse, but no words came out. Marla stared at the screen, lips parted, brows furrowed. Warren leaned in, his fork abandoned in his mashed potatoes, eyes locked on the screen like he was trying to deny what he was seeing. Helen clutched her glass a little too tightly. The video ended with the man slipping into the secured access hallway. I let the silence breathe for another second. Then I looked up and met Jane's gaze. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I simply turned to Helen, pushed the phone gently across the table toward her, and said, "That's from the bank's internal camera system. I obtained it legally. Had a feeling tonight's menu might include more than roast lamb." Helen didn't say a word. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone, replayed the footage in silence. Jane remained standing, but now her shoulders were slumped, eyes darting, lips quivering like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. Marla hadn't moved. She was looking at me, but not really seeing me, like she was sifting through memories, recalibrating the last few weeks in light of this new truth. No one spoke, not for a long minute. Then Warren muttered, "That's Ellis." The words hung there like smoke. Jane let out a shaky laugh. It didn't land. That's not what it looks like," she said, but even she didn't believe it. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of how hot the room felt. The temperature had climbed in that way only tension could cause. I took a slow breath, not out of relief, but to hold back the thousand things I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat quietly and watched the house of cards tremble. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the storm. I sat on the edge of our bed that night, the shadows of the dinner party still flickering in my mind like echoes off cold walls. Marla was in the bathroom, the sound of running water her only contribution to the tense silence between us. My fingers tapped lightly against my thigh, slow and steady, as I replayed it all again, the champagne accusation, the horrified silence, Jane's trembling voice. But mostly, I kept seeing that moment when I pressed play. How the truth came alive in that tiny screen. How Jane's confidence drained in real time. I rewound everything in my head, but I didn't need to. The memory had branded itself into me. It had started months ago, quietly, like all betrayals do. Marla's father, Hugh Tillman, died 3 months earlier. His heart finally gave up in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that was more resentment than riches. He wasn't a man people cried for, not even his children. But he had left something behind. A mountain cabin and a safety deposit box at Rivergate National. The cabin was dust and splinters, not worth much. But the box was a legend. Hugh had bragged about it for years. Gold bars, he'd say at Thanksgiving, tapping his temple like it was some clever secret. Collector's pieces. Real values in history, not market. No one took him seriously until after the funeral, when the box was opened and it was empty. No bars. No record of withdrawal. Just a velvet pouch and a folded note that read, "For those who earn it." No one said anything at first. But suspicion moves like wind under a door. It gets in. A week later, there were whispers. 2 weeks later, the whispers had names. Mine. The outsider. The husband who didn't grow up with them. The man who stood at the edge of their old stories and asked too many questions. Jane led the charge, of course. She never liked me. Said I was too polished, like it was a sin. She told Marla once that I looked like a man who'd betray you in a high-end suit. Never mind that I was the one who helped pay off her student loans behind the scenes when she was too proud to ask their father for help. Still, I stayed quiet. I let them talk. Let them circle like vultures. I even let Jane smirk her way through brunches, tossing little jabs about some people not understanding family loyalty. I said nothing. Until I saw the bank's security footage request form on the edge of my desk at work. I'd nearly trashed it, but something in my gut twisted. I called in a favor from a friend in legal counsel who owed me after I helped restructure his portfolio last year. 3 days later, a flash drive arrived in a padded envelope. No return address. When I saw him, I didn't feel rage. Not at first. Just this eerie calm. Ellis, Jane's fiancé. The man who once pulled me aside to thank me for being the stable one in the family. The man who shook my hand like we were equals, even while trying to size up my watch and shoes in the same glance. There he was on camera. Same camel coat, same twitch in his eye, same nervous posture as he unlocked the safety box and slid something velvet into his coat pocket. I could have confronted him right then. Could have stormed into their apartment and thrown the flash drive at his chest. But that wouldn't have cleared my name. That would have just turned me into the aggressor in another one of Jane's stories. No, I needed them all in one room. I needed silence and knives on plates and champagne breath. That's why I stayed quiet when Marla mentioned the dinner. Why I smiled and nodded and brought wine like nothing was wrong. I wasn't there for food. I was there for the moment the lie cracked wide open. And when it did, I watched Jane's face melt under the weight of it. Back in the bedroom, Marla emerged finally, her robe tied loose, eyes tired and red-rimmed. She sat next to me, knees close but not touching. "You could have told me," she said softly. "I could have," I replied. "But you didn't." I turned toward her. "Would it have changed anything? Would you have believed me?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers curled around the edge of the bedspread. "I didn't want to doubt you. But it's different when your own sister says something like that." I nodded. "I know. That's why I brought proof." She closed her eyes. "You think I betrayed you?" "No," I said. "Not tonight." "But you hesitated. You didn't say a word when Jane pointed that fork." And that, I inhaled slowly. That hesitation told me how fragile this has really been. Marla looked down. "I'm sorry. I didn't want her apology. I wanted understanding. I wanted to know why, after everything hit. After the way I'd stood beside her when her father cut her out of his insurance plans, when I helped her mom through recovery after her surgery, why her first instinct was still to question me. Maybe it was the years of being the outlier in her family. Maybe it was something deeper neither of us could name. I kept the video quiet because I knew this wasn't about justice, I said. This was about humiliation. They wanted a show, so I gave them one. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with conflict, regret, something else I couldn't name. "Ellis, do you think Jane knew?" I exhaled. I think Jane's always known more than she lets on. But whether she was part of it or just protecting him, that's for her to answer. We sat in silence for a long while after that. Marla leaned into me eventually, resting her head on my shoulder. I didn't move at first. Then I draped my arm around her. Not out of forgiveness, but fatigue. Everything felt heavy. Her family. The lies. The years of tiptoeing around Jane's superiority complex and Warren's dismissiveness. And now, this theft. This betrayal. This accusation wrapped in a dinner party. "You think they'll apologize?" she asked. I laughed under my breath. "No, but they'll be quieter. And that's enough for now." I knew it wasn't over. People like Jane didn't go quietly. But she had been caught. And Ellis, well, I had a feeling he'd be next. I wasn't done. Not yet. This was only the first move. You could hear the knife hit the plate when the video ended. That sharp clang was the first sound anyone made, and it rang out louder than it should have, slicing through the silence like a warning shot. The image on the phone had faded to black, but the timestamp still glowed faintly in the corner. 3:12 p.m., 2 days before Hughes' will was read. And right there in the center of the frame, standing at the teller's window, was Ellis, Jane's fiancé. Wearing that same gray coat I'd seen him wear to dinner once. Same careful walk. Same nervous glance up at the security camera, like he knew something about this wasn't going to stay hidden. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just let it settle. Jane, still standing, looked like she'd been drained of blood. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just this tight little gasp like she'd been punched in the gut. She blinked fast, her fork still trembling in her hand. "That's not." She started, but the words tangled themselves up. That can't be." Warren leaned forward, squinting at the screen like maybe he'd see someone else if he just looked hard enough. "That's Ellis," he said, flat and hollow, confirming what we all knew. Marla hadn't said a word yet. She sat like a statue, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. But I saw the way her jaw clenched, the way her fingers dug into the soft fabric of her dress. Her eyes weren't on the screen anymore. They were on me. Helen, her mother, reached for the phone with slow, deliberate fingers, like she was afraid it might burn her. She hit replay. The screen lit up again, and for the second time, we all watched Ellis enter the bank. We watched him approach the counter, pull something from his pocket. We watched him sign something and then be led to the vault. The camera didn't follow, but it didn't need to. The damage had been done. When it ended again, Helen set the phone down like it weighed 50 pounds. Where did you get this?" she asked me, her voice so thin it barely registered. "Legal request through a colleague." I didn't break any laws. I kept my voice calm, even. I wasn't here to gloat. I just wanted the truth to sit in the middle of the table, undeniable and raw. Jane suddenly found her voice again. "You set this up," she spat, eyes wild. "You had this the whole time and just waited? You let us think." "You wanted to think it was me," I cut in, finally. "You didn't care about proof. You just needed a villain you didn't have to love." She flinched. The words hit harder than I expected. Maybe because she knew they were true. "You should have come to me," she said, almost pleading now. "Privately. We could have handled this without making a scene. And I should have never been accused in the first place, I replied. But you didn't mind making that public, did you? She opened her mouth again, but I raised a hand. I wasn't finished. That's Ellis in the footage. No deep fakes. No editing. Just a man who knew the combination to a box he should never have touched. Helen looked between us like she'd just discovered her children had been strangers all along. Jane, is this true? Jane stared at her. I don't know. I didn't. She hesitated, the lie choking her. I didn't know he went there. He told me he was meeting someone about a deal. A deal? I repeated. That required a visit to your dead father's safety deposit box? She scowled. You don't know everything. No, I said. But I know enough. Marla's voice broke through the tension like a crack in ice. Why didn't you say anything to me? I turned to her. Her tone wasn't angry, it was hurt. Because I needed you to see it like I did. Without bias. Without pressure. Just truth. Her lips pressed together. You thought I wouldn't believe you? I thought you'd want to. But that's not the same. The room felt like it was shrinking, walls closing in with every passing second. Jane was still standing, but her defiance had curdled into desperation. She looked at Warren, who shook his head and looked away. Then Helen. Then Marla. None of them came to her rescue. You really believe this? She snapped, turning on her sister. You're going to take his word over mine? It's not his word, Jane, Marla said softly. It's a recording. It's a bank security system. It's evidence. Jane looked ready to cry, but I'd seen those tears before. Crocodile slick and full of manipulation. I didn't fall for them then, and I wasn't about to now. I want to speak to Ellis, Helen said, suddenly commanding. Now. Tonight. Good luck, I muttered. I left him a voicemail with a copy of the footage. Haven't heard back. Jane's eyes widened. You sent it to him? I thought he should know the truth too. You're trying to ruin him, she hissed. You're trying to destroy everything. No, I said, standing up slowly. I'm trying to clear my name. Everything else is just consequence. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath. The room didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a graveyard. Every lie buried. Every illusion mourned. I think we're done here, I said. Unless anyone else wants to accuse me of something. No one answered. No one even looked up. I stepped away from the table, reached for Marla's hand. She didn't move right away. But then she stood too. And even though she didn't say it out loud, her silence felt like agreement. As we walked toward the door, Jane finally spoke again, her voice low and bitter. You were never one of us, Noah. I paused, just for a second, and then turned back to face her. Thank God for that. And with that, we left. The night air outside was cool against my skin. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. But beneath that tiredness, there was a pulse of something else, clarity. The truth had been spoken. Now it was time to see what survived in its wake. The silence between us on the drive home was louder than anything Jane had screamed across the dinner table. Marla hadn't said a single word since we walked out of her mother's house. Her posture in the passenger seat was stiff, one arm crossed over her chest, the other hand mindlessly scrolling through her phone screen that she wasn't really looking at. I didn't push her. I'd learned a long time ago that silence could be safer than words when the ground was still shifting beneath us. But that didn't make it any easier. The glow of the dashboard lights painted her face in cool blues and greens, but her expression was unreadable. I caught glimpses of her in my peripheral vision, the crease between her brows, the subtle way her jaw clenched every time I changed lanes, like movement itself, unnerved her. She wasn't furious. She wasn't in denial. She was processing, which scared me more than yelling ever could have. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my gaze on the road, though every red light felt like a trap. I kept thinking she'd turn to me and say something, anything, but she didn't. And the silence kept dragging. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't wait for me to cut the engine before opening the door and stepping out. No storming off. No slamming doors. Just that same unnerving quiet. Inside, she went straight to the bedroom while I lingered by the door, slipping off my shoes like a guest in my own home. The house felt unfamiliar, like everything inside it had shifted half an inch to the left, and nothing fit where it used to. I poured myself a glass of water just to do something with my hands. When I finally entered the bedroom, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, robe wrapped tightly around her, staring at nothing in particular. You had that video the whole time? She asked, still not looking at me. I nodded. Yeah. She finally turned, her eyes searching mine like she was looking for proof of betrayal. Why didn't you tell me? I leaned against the doorframe and took a slow breath. Because you didn't ask. She blinked. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said carefully, when your sister accused me in front of everyone, you didn't ask me if it was true. You didn't even look at me. You just sat there, like part of you was waiting for confirmation. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The air between us pulsed with tension. She shook her head. That's not fair. No, Marla, I said, pushing off the wall and stepping toward her. What's not fair is being married to someone who says she believes in you, but still lets the possibility of your guilt sit on her tongue like it might taste right. She looked away. I didn't know what to think. I dropped into the chair by the window, water glass still in hand. That's exactly it. You didn't know what to think. That should have told you everything. Her silence this time wasn't defensive. It was defeated. You think I didn't trust you? I took a long sip. I think you wanted to. But I also think you've been conditioned to believe Jane before you believe anyone else, including me. That's not true, she said, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? I said quietly. You knew your sister was capable of lying. Hell, she's done it before. Petty things, cruel things. But tonight, all it took was a pointed finger and a raised voice. And suddenly you couldn't look me in the eye. She rubbed her temples like she was trying to massage the memory away. I was shocked. You don't know what it's like to grow up with Jane. She makes everything about control. She's always been able to twist situations until they bend in her favor. And tonight, I guess, I fell for it again. That was the closest she'd come to an admission, and it should have been enough. But I still felt the sting under my skin. I'm not angry, I said. Not really. You are, she interrupted. And you have every right to be. I didn't respond to that. I couldn't. Because she wasn't wrong. She pulled her knees up onto the bed and rested her chin there, looking so much smaller than she had hours earlier. You planned all of this, didn't you? I hesitated. I prepared for it. You knew it was coming. I had a hunch. You've seen how Jane's been since the will reading. She's been circling like a hawk. And you still came. Still played nice. I came for you, I said. Because some foolish part of me thought if I just stayed silent, if I let it play out, you'd see who really had your back. She winced, and I regretted the edge in my voice. But the words were already out there, between us, raw and real. You think trust broke tonight, I added, but it's been cracking for a while. Jane just gave it a name. She looked down at her hands, twisting the ring on her finger. I didn't realize how much I relied on my family to tell me what's real and what's not. And where does that leave us? I asked, honestly. She didn't answer. I stood, set the glass on the nightstand, and walked to the door. I'm going to sleep in the guest room. That made her look up fast. Noah, not because I'm angry, I said. Because I need space. Not from you. From the version of you that doubts me without proof. Her eyes glistened. She nodded. I paused before leaving. This marriage has survived a lot of things. But if it's going to keep surviving, we have to talk about more than just what happened tonight. We need to talk about what's been building between us. The cracks. I know, she whispered. I left the room and closed the door quietly behind me. I didn't slam it. Didn't want to turn this moment into drama. I just needed distance. That night, I lay awake on the smaller bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how long I've been trying to belong to a family that never wanted me. How long I've been trying to prove something that shouldn't need proving. My name, my loyalty, my integrity. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if love alone could fix what suspicion had broken. Ella showed up the next morning. No warning. No call. Just the sound of hesitant knuckles rapping against the door, the kind of knock that says I'm not sure if I should be here. I looked through the peephole before opening it, and there he was, his gray coat rumpled, tie crooked, eyes swollen like he hadn't slept. The guilt was practically dripping off him. He didn't come with Jane, didn't bring excuses or backup, just himself, a breath that trembled when I opened the door, and the look of a man who knew the walls were closing in. Noah, he said, voice low. Can we talk? I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. He took that as a yes and walked in, his eyes flicking around like he expected Jane to appear from behind a door. But the house was silent, the air tight with the residue of last night's confrontation. Marla was at her friend's place. She'd left early to clear her head. or maybe to avoid this exact conversation. Either way, it was just me and Ellis. He stood in the center of the living room, unsure what to do with his hands. "I owe you a lot more than an apology," he said. "You owe a lot of people more than that," I replied, shutting the door behind us. I didn't think it would get this far. He swallowed, eyes darting to the floor. "I didn't mean to cause all this." "You didn't mean to get caught," I corrected. He winced. Yeah. I folded my arms and leaned against the wall. "Why are you here, Ellis?" He let out a breath, shaky and shallow. "Because I need to tell you the truth. All of it. I know you already have the video, but I have more than the video," I interrupted. "I've got legal documentation from the bank. Your signature on the withdrawal slip. The exact weight of the gold that went missing. The teller's affidavit. You're not here to confess, Ellis. You're here because you're cornered." That shut him up. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the jar. Only the jar was filled with $80,000 worth of gold and a mountain of lies. He ran a hand through his hair and paced in a slow, aimless line. "I was in a bind," he finally said. "I had this deal lined up, a tech startup that needed investors. A guaranteed triple return. I just needed to get in fast before the window closed. And you thought robbing your fiancé's dead father was the best way in?" He stopped pacing, looked at me like he wished I'd make it sound better than it was. "I didn't take it to keep. I meant to put it back." I laughed, humorless. "You meant to? That's your defense." "I thought I had more time," he snapped, then immediately reined himself in. "Sorry. Jane didn't know. She didn't. I swear." I narrowed my eyes. "Then why did she accuse me?" His face paled. "Because when she found out it was missing, I panicked. I told her someone must have gotten there before us. I didn't say it was you, I swear, but I didn't stop her either when she started blaming you. It took the heat off me. I could barely keep my hands from curling into fists. You let her point that fork at me and accuse me of stealing from her father. You let her do that while you sat there pretending to be just as shocked. I didn't think you'd have proof," he admitted quietly. "Yeah," I said bitterly. "You thought I'd sit there and take it. Let my marriage drown in suspicion while you skated away clean." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I deserve that." "No," I said. "You deserve worse." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. "It's not all of it, but it's a start. I've liquidated what I could. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll get the rest." I didn't reach for the envelope. "You think I want your money?" He blinked. "It's restitution." "No, Ellis," I said, stepping closer. "Restitution is when you come clean before being exposed. Restitution is when you don't stand by while someone else takes the fall. What you're doing now is damage control." He lowered his hand. "So what do you want?" "I want your confession," I said plainly. "Not to me. To them. To Marla. To Helen. To Jane, if you still have the nerve. I want it recorded. Clear. I want them to hear the truth from your mouth, not just see it on a screen." He looked genuinely shaken. "I'll lose Jane." "She was willing to sacrifice me to protect you," I said. "So if you really want to do the right thing, start with ending the lie." He hesitated, eyes flicking around again, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll talk. Just not today." "No," I said firmly. "Today. Right now." I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a portable audio recorder, one I used for interviews years ago, back when I did freelance business profiles. I set it on the coffee table, clicked it on, and nodded. "Talk." He stared at it like it might explode. Then he sat down, cleared his throat, and began. "My name is Ellis Grant," he said, voice shaking. "I withdrew the gold from Hugh Tillman's safety deposit box 2 days before the will was read. I used the key Jane kept in her jewelry box. She didn't know I had it. I planned to invest the money and return it before anyone noticed, but the deal tanked. When the gold was discovered missing, I let Jane believe someone else had taken it. When she accused Noah, I didn't stop her. I let her believe it. I let everyone believe it." He paused, voice cracking. "I'm sorry." I turned off the recorder. "You'll send that to Helen, to Marla, to Jane. And if I don't hear that you did by noon tomorrow, I'll send it for you, along with the documents. You understand?" He nodded. "I do." I finally took the envelope from his hand and opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $20,000, a fraction of what he'd taken. But at this point, the money wasn't the point. "You can let yourself out," I said. He looked at me, almost pleading. "Can you ever forgive me?" "No," I said simply. "But maybe I'll forget your face someday." That's the best you'll get. And I left him sitting there, alone in a room full of his own regret. I didn't want to call it a family meeting. That made it sound like this was about reconciliation, like there'd be hugs and forgiveness and second chances passed around like dessert. But we needed them all in one room. We needed witnesses. We needed the kind of silence that only truth can drop into the center of a table like a grenade. We held it at Helen's house again, the same place where the accusation had been made. Fitting, like circling back to the scene of a crime. Marla stood beside me, not saying much, her arms crossed like a shield she didn't know how to lower. Her eyes didn't leave the door from the moment we arrived. She didn't trust Jane to come quietly or come at all. But Jane arrived. Loud heels on tile, lips painted too bright, sunglasses on even though the sun was long gone. Her presence sucked the warmth out of the room immediately. She walked in like she still thought she could control the narrative, like one good glare could reset the truth. And behind her, reluctantly and visibly uncomfortable, came Ellis. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. Good. He didn't deserve the luxury of looking anyone in the face, not yet. Warren was already seated. Helen stood by the fireplace, arms folded, watching them enter like she wasn't sure whether she should embrace her daughter or throw her out. The tension made the air taste like metal. Jane didn't waste time. If this is another ambush, I'm leaving. No, I said, stepping forward, my voice steady. This is the end of the lie. Marla pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A Bluetooth speaker on the mantel clicked alive. The recording began to play. Ellis's voice filled the room. Stammering, stopping, admitting, his name, the theft, the key from Jane's jewelry box, his investment scheme, the fact that he let me take the fall because it was easier. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. When the audio ended, no one said anything. Not at first. Warren looked stunned, but not surprised. Helen looked like she wanted to be sick. Marla just stared at her sister. Jane's face had shifted from smug to shell-shocked. But then the denial kicked in. He's lying, she said, laughing nervously. He's trying to cover for you. You probably paid him to say that. Ellis flinched. Jane, stop. She turned on him so fast I thought her heel might snap. You're really doing this? Throwing me under the bus. I'm telling the truth, he said. His voice had no strength left. I can't do it anymore. I took the gold. I tried to fix it, but shut up, she screamed, her voice cracking. You don't get to play the victim now. Marla stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with steel. How long did you know? Jane blinked at her, the question slicing through her rage. How long, Jane? Marla repeated. You accused my husband. You let me think. God, you let me think he could have actually done it. Did you know the whole time? Jane opened her mouth, but no words came out. You lied to my face, Marla said. Again. I didn't know at first, Jane whispered finally. Not until later. He promised me he'd return it. That no one would ever know. You said he changed, Marla said. You told me therapy helped you. That you weren't out for blood anymore. Jane laughed bitterly. Therapy doesn't fix being the second daughter. The invisible one. The one who never got the benefit of the doubt. This isn't about you being the second daughter, I said, stepping in now. This is about you being a grown woman who thought she could twist the truth because no one ever called you on it. You're one to talk, she snapped. You've always been smug. Like you were above us. Like you didn't need family. But you needed us when your career tanked, didn't you? I didn't need you, I said. I stayed for Marla. And I bit my tongue for years while you made digs and tried to sabotage every corner of our relationship. Helen stepped forward now, her voice trembling. You let us believe he stole from you. You let us sit around that dinner table and throw daggers at an innocent man. Jane turned on her heel. Fine. Crucify me then. Make me the villain. That's what you've all been waiting for. No, Marla said. We've just stopped pretending you weren't one. That shut her up. She looked at Ellis, like he might still defend her. He didn't. You were supposed to fix it, she hissed at him. I tried, he said, defeated. But I can't fix this. And I won't lie for you anymore. Jane let out a short, sharp laugh. You think you're noble now? You're just a coward who confessed when it was convenient. He looked like he'd heard that line before. Maybe more than once. Warren, who hadn't spoken until now, stood up slowly. I used to think Noah was paranoid, he said. That he saw betrayal where there wasn't any. But maybe he just saw what the rest of us were too scared to admit. Jane looked at her brother like he'd just stabbed her. I'm done, she said. This family is a joke. No, I said, watching her walk toward the door. This family is finally honest. That's the difference. She stopped at the door and turned to me. You were never one of us, Noah. And I finally said it. Thank God. She left. The slam of the door echoed through the house like a clap of thunder. Ellis followed her silently, dragging shame like a shadow. The room deflated. Helen sat down. Warren poured himself a drink. Marla stood still for a long moment, then walked over to me and wrapped her arms around my waist. No words, just breath and silence and the heaviness of something broken but now visible in the light. That night, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And sometimes, that's the better reward. The days that followed the family meeting were like traveling through a house in darkness, navigating familiar rooms but bumping into corners you once knew by memory. Marla retreated into her work, burying herself in spreadsheets and project timelines, the rhythmic click of her keyboard offering some semblance of control she'd lost at home. I, on the other hand, remained at our apartment, trying to fill the silence with tasks. A leaky faucet fixed, bookshelves reorganized, cardboard boxes stacked by the door for donation. Anything to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't spiral into the same questions over and over. How had I let it come to this? How had suspicion grown between us like an uninvited weed? How do you pull a marriage back from the edge of a cliff once doubt has been planted? I admit, part of me found comfort in my solitude. The guest room had become my refuge again, not because I felt unwelcome in our bedroom, but because I needed the distance. Distance like a salve, numbing the raw ache where trust had been fractured. Yet every night, before sleep claimed me, I'd peek at our bed in the darkened hallway, its neat sheets of silent accusation, a question that tugged at me. Was I the only one who felt lost in the space between us? The truth was, I didn't know. And that uncertainty pounded in my chest harder than anger ever could. One morning, as sunlight slanted through the blinds and painted the living room floor in gold stripes, I found a note slipped under the apartment door. Marla's handwriting, neat and small, read, "Let's talk. Tonight, 8. No interruptions." I folded it carefully and placed it on the coffee table, the paper stiff from her resolve. I stared at it all day, second-guessing what I would say, how to approach the tangle of blame and betrayal that had become our shared language. It felt like preparing for a negotiation that might never end well. Me, defending not just my name, but the very foundation of our relationship. Her, weighing every word for truth or concealment. At 8 o'clock sharp, she came home and paused in the doorway, her expression guarded but resolute. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail that revealed the tension in her neck. She didn't smile. I didn't either. We sat across from each other at the small dining table, the same one where the gold accusation had first exploded. The room felt both intimate and vast, like we were separated by a canyon we had to cross. Marla took a deep breath and began, her voice steady but soft. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, that trust has been cracking for a long time, and about why I didn't defend you when Jane accused you." She paused, rubbing her fingertips together. "I realized I've been leaning on my family's version of reality for so long that I forgot how to trust my own judgment. I wanted to believe Jane, because she's my sister. But that loyalty made me blind to everything else, including you. I see that now." Her confession hung between us, fragile as glass. I leaned forward. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than I can say." I felt a lump in my throat, an unusual vulnerability that surprised me. But words alone won't fix what's broken. We need to rebuild trust, piece by piece. She nodded and reached into her bag, pulling out a small pamphlet from the community center, one on couples counseling. "I signed us up for a session next week." Her eyes searched mine, daring me to refuse. I thought, maybe talking to someone impartial could help. If we're serious about moving forward, we need tools. The pamphlet detailed everything. Weekly meetings, exercises to rebuild communication, homework assignments to practice honesty and empathy. I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing her willingness to step into something uncomfortable for both of us. "I'll go," I said finally. "Not for you, for me. I need to understand why I keep trying to belong to families that want to eat me alive." I tried to keep the cynicism out of my voice, but failed. She let out a small laugh, bittersweet, and laid her hand over mine. After that night, we embarked on counseling with a cautious optimism, like two travelers plotting a course through uncharted territory. Our counselor, a gentle woman with kind eyes named Dr. Alvarez, guided us through exercises that forced us to articulate fears we'd buried under years of polite smiles and half-truths. In one session, we sat facing each other without speaking for 5 minutes, feeling the weight of unsaid things. In another, we wrote letters to ourselves, acknowledging how our past shaped our capacity for trust. I learned that my eagerness to prove myself had blinded me to Marla's need for validation, that my silence had sometimes sounded like acquiescence. She learned that loyalty to her family had created blind spots to my truth, that her silence when I needed defense was as damaging as any lie. Outside the counseling room, we applied these lessons in small ways. Stopping before assuming motives, checking in when one of us fell quiet, sharing our schedules so we weren't left wondering where the other had gone. Some nights, we still sat apart on the couch, each reading or scrolling, but now we paused to share a comment or ask about the other's day. The silent space between us began to feel less like an abyss and more like a blank canvas, one we could choose to fill with understanding instead of suspicion. I won't pretend the distance between us disappeared overnight. There were setbacks, moments when one of us slipped back into old patterns, when my voice carried a hidden edge or her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We'd pause, remember the tools from Dr. Alvarez, and course correct. And slowly, those corrections began to stick. We started rediscovering each other, her laugh in its unguarded lift, my hand steady in hers. We even found ourselves planning new rituals to reinforce our bond. A weekly walk at sunset, cooking dinner together on Tuesdays, a nightly ritual of sharing one thing we appreciated about the other. One afternoon, we visited the community center for our last scheduled session. Dr. Alvarez congratulated us on our progress, noting that rebuilding trust is not a destination but an ongoing practice. She handed us a certificate of completion, symbolic, perhaps, but meaningful. On the drive home, Marla reached across the console and squeezed my arm. I glanced over, and in her eyes I saw something clearer than before, not blind faith, but a deliberate choice to believe. Not naive optimism, but a commitment to keep trying. That night, after dinner, we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker on. I poured 2 glasses of wine, the same red I'd brought to that fateful dinner party months ago, only this time our toast was different. We clinked glasses and I said, the distance, which taught us where to draw our lines. She grinned, her eyes reflecting the streetlights below. Into proximity, which taught us how to rebuild. We leaned across the table, sharing a soft kiss that tasted of forgiveness and possibility. In the quiet that followed, I realized that letting go isn't losing. Letting go of old expectations, old resentments, old definitions of what we owed each other, those were the steps that brought us back together. The distance between us had been painful, but it had also been the space we needed to find ourselves and each other again. And though the future remained uncertain, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, grounded hope. Because trust, like anything precious, thrives not in perfection but in the willingness to show up and keep trying, even when the road ahead is uncharted. It was a gray afternoon when Helen called me. I was standing on the porch of the cabin, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. It had rained earlier, and the scent of damp pine and fresh soil clung to everything. Marla was inside, curled on the couch under a worn quilt, dozing while a low jazz record crackled through the cabin's old speakers. The quiet had become comforting, a buffer between the wreckage of what had happened and the slow rebuilding of what could still be saved. When my phone buzzed in my pocket and I saw her name, I hesitated. I hadn't spoken to Helen since the night Jane blew apart her own credibility. She had called Marla once or twice, but I had kept my distance, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Still, I answered. Noah, she said softly, I owe you an apology. There was a pause, as if the words had taken more out of her than she expected. I didn't expect this call, I said. I know, she replied, but I've been thinking. About everything. I stepped off the porch and wandered into the clearing beyond the cabin, phone to my ear, boots crunching lightly on wet gravel. Jane still trying to rewrite the narrative? She's quiet now, Helen said. But that doesn't mean she's done. She's angry, embarrassed. She won't say it out loud, but I know she blames me for believing you. You didn't believe me, I said. You believed the evidence. There was another pause. You're right. I let that hang in the air. I wasn't looking for a grand gesture. Just honesty. I want to meet, she said after a moment. Just you and me. No Marla. No Jane. Just to talk. There's something I think you should see. All right, I said. Where? Lunch, she said. Old Magnolia Bistro. Tomorrow at 1. I agreed, and after we hung up, I stood there a long while, letting the weight of that conversation settle in. It wasn't a peace offering, not really. It was something quieter, more personal. An acknowledgement. A window cracked open where before there had been only closed doors. The next day, I drove back into town. Marla didn't ask questions when I told her. She only nodded and said, "You'll know what to say." That was new, trust that didn't need proof, faith without defense. The old Magnolia was nearly empty when I arrived. Helen was already seated near the window, her hair pinned back neatly, a pale lavender scarf around her neck. She looked smaller somehow. Older. Not physically, but in presence. The kind of weariness that grief and guilt pressed deep into a person. "Noah," she greeted, rising slightly. I nodded and Saturday Helen. She waved the waiter off after ordering tea, then reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. She placed it on the table without saying anything for a few seconds. "This," she said, "was delivered to me a few weeks after Hugh passed. It was supposed to be part of the formal will package, but it came separately. Couriered. No explanation. I kept it to myself because, well, I didn't know what to make of it." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were several neatly folded documents. I opened them slowly, scanning the headers. Legal, notarized. Hugh Tillman's handwriting. His signature. And then I saw it, my name. Executor. I looked up at Helen. I was. What? Hugh updated the will 6 months before he died, she explained. He never told the kids. I didn't even know until that envelope showed up. He named you as executor. Not Jane. Not Warren. I was stunned. Hugh hadn't exactly been warm to me in life. At best, we'd coexisted. At worst, he'd been cold and dismissive, especially in the early years of my marriage to Marla. We'd had tense conversations, sure, but I'd always tried to respect the distance. And now this. He didn't like you, Helen said, as if reading my thoughts. But he respected you. He watched. Saw how you handled things when the family turned inside out. How you never made drama, even when Jane pushed every button you had. He used to say, "Noah's not one of us, but at least he acts like a grown man." I exhaled slowly. Why didn't Jane or Warren mention this? Because they didn't know, and I didn't tell them. I narrowed my eyes slightly. Why not? She looked down at her tea. Because I was ashamed. Ashamed of how he treated you. Ashamed of how easily I believed Jane's finger-pointing. I wanted to believe the best of her. But deep down, I think I always knew. I folded the documents back into the envelope carefully. So now what? That's up to you, she said. The estate's a mess. The cabin needs work. There are accounts still frozen. But legally, it's yours to sort through. You have the authority. I stared out the window, watching leaves flutter past the glass like little gold coins. I don't want power, Helen, I said. I just wanted peace. I just wanted my name back. She nodded slowly. Then maybe this is how you get it. We talked for a while longer. About Hugh. About Marla. Even about Jane, how she had always needed someone to blame, and how I'd been an easy target. But Helen didn't ask me to forgive her daughter. She didn't beg for harmony. She just sat across from me like a woman trying to make something right before it was too late. When we finished lunch, she stood and reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said. "For not throwing the match when you had every reason to burn us all down." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and let go. Back at the cabin that night, I handed the envelope to Marla. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. "He made you executor?" she said quietly. "Yeah." She shook her head, not in disbelief, but in that strange way people do when life hands them irony wrapped in truth. "He didn't show it much, but maybe he saw you clearer than we did." "Maybe," I said. Marla leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "So what now?" "Now," I said, "I finish what he started. Not for him. For us." And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was trying to earn my place. I already had it. Word spread quickly. Ellis had disappeared. No dramatic exit, no drawn-out confrontation, just gone. Marla heard it first from a cousin who still followed Jane on social media. One day, Jane was posting blurry photos of an engagement ring with poetic captions about forgiveness, and the next, she was uploading passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and starting over. Ellis's name vanished from her profiles, and when Marla texted her out of curiosity, Jane's reply was short and sharp. "He wasn't who I thought he was. You were right. That was all. There were rumors, of course, One claimed he skipped town and was hiding out in Arizona. Another said he'd gone abroad, chasing the same half-baked business deal that led him to steal in the first place. Some whispered about restitution, though no one had seen a single cent returned. I didn't care. I didn't need Ellis to explain himself again, or beg, or crawl back. What he owed wasn't financial. It was integrity, and that check had already bounced. Jane, on the other hand, wasn't done. Not really. Her silence was a performance, measured and strategic. She didn't reach out to me, but she started calling Marla with increasing frequency. It began as small talk, updates about Helen's health, questions about old family recipes, harmless nostalgia. But Marla could hear it in her voice. The need. The slow creep of manipulation. She's trying to pull me back in, Marla said one night, sitting at the edge of the bed with her phone still lit in her hand. Like none of it happened. She wants an ally, I said, not looking up from the estate paperwork I was organizing on the nightstand. Not a sister. Marla sighed. She wants a reset. Without accountability. And you? I asked. Do you want that? Marla didn't answer right away. Then she opened her contacts, scrolled at Jane's name, and blocked it. That silence? It felt like a door closing gently and permanently. No anger. Just peace. Warren surprised me next. I hadn't expected much from him. He'd always been quiet, observant, the kind of man who nodded more than he spoke. But one afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. When I opened it, there it was. You were right. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I should have. I won't pretend I was brave. I stared at the screen for a while. There was no anger in me, not anymore. But I didn't feel the urge to write back either. Some apologies are better left suspended in the air, acknowledged, not accepted. So I didn't reply. I let it sit. The truth is, I was done with that side of the family. Not because I hated them, not because I wanted revenge, but because staying connected had always felt like walking through a house where every picture frame was crooked and no one was allowed to fix them. They called it tradition. I called it exhaustion. When Marla saw the message, she didn't ask if I planned to respond. She just said, that's something. It is, I said, but it doesn't change anything. She nodded, and for the first time, it felt like we were on the same page, not just about her family, but about boundaries, about survival. We started fresh, not with dramatic declarations or big gestures, but with something smaller, slower. We changed the locks on the house. We donated old furniture that neither of us had picked out. We went through photo albums and removed the ones that felt more like weapons than memories. There were fewer voices in our lives now, but the ones that remained were quieter and kinder. One afternoon, while we were clearing out the garage, Marla found an old cardboard box filled with letters I'd written to her early in our relationship. Letters I never gave her. She sat on the floor and read them one by one, silently. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy. You always made space for me, she said. Even when I didn't give it back. I knelt beside her. I wasn't perfect either. I stayed quiet when I should have fought. I made peace when I should have made noise. But you stayed, she whispered. I did, I said. And I still am. From then on, things changed. Not drastically, but perceptibly. She started asking me questions again, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. We ate dinner at the table again. No distractions, no TV humming in the background. She let her hand brush mine when she passed behind my chair. I caught her watching me sometimes, as if she was seeing me all over again. One night, while we were curled up on the couch, I looked at her and asked, "Do you trust me again?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm trying," she said. "Every day, and it's getting easier." That was enough. Not a finish line, but a checkpoint. I started teaching again, not full-time, just a few workshops at the community center. Financial literacy, budgeting, how to navigate probate without being crushed by red tape. People showed up. Not a lot at first, but enough to remind me that what I knew mattered, that I still had something to give. And giving it, freely, without being used, felt like a revelation. Marla came to one of the sessions. She sat in the back, taking notes even though she already knew half the material. Afterward, she hugged me in front of the group. That hug, that public moment of support, it meant more than I could put into words. We were healing, not fixing, not pretending, just healing. Later that week, I got a call from the estate attorney confirming the last of the paperwork had gone through. The cabin was officially ours, the accounts had been reconciled, and I'd fulfilled every duty Hugh had left for me. When I told Marla, she smiled faintly and said, "You've been holding this family together longer than any of us realized." "I'm not holding it anymore," I said. "I'm just letting go of the weight." And letting go didn't feel like losing. It felt like choosing. Choosing peace over performance, boundaries over bitterness, truth over legacy. That weekend, we packed a bag and went back to the cabin. This time, we brought nothing but a few books, a bottle of wine, and each other. No family drama. No ghosts. No gold. Just space. Space to be trusted again. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was clawing my way back to the version of life I'd lost. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Months passed. The noise died down. No more surprise calls. No more urgent texts from Helen. No more passive-aggressive voicemails from Jane asking if Marla had cooled off. The drama that had once pressed against every wall of our lives, shouting through family dinners and holidays and birthdays, finally quieted to a hum. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. We started to grow. Marla found herself again, slowly but surely, outside the orbit of her family's expectations. She started writing again, not for a blog or approval, but for herself, poems scribbled in a journal she kept by the nightstand. Sometimes forgotten there for days, sometimes open like a wound that needed air. She volunteered at the community food co-op, started helping organize seasonal events in our neighborhood. People began to see her not as Jane's sister or Hugh's daughter or the woman married to the guy who got accused at a dinner party, but as herself. And the more she leaned into that identity, the more the weight in her shoulders seemed to lift. I found my footing too. At the community center, the Saturday sessions had grown. What started as a few chairs in a musty room turned into a full weekly class. Young adults, divorced couples, retired folks. All of them came to learn how to manage what they had and protect it from being taken, misused, or misunderstood. I talked about wills, about the importance of naming executors you trusted, about spotting manipulation in business and in family. They asked questions. They took notes. They thanked me afterward. And I started to believe, really believe, that my voice still had value. That I didn't need an office on the 30th floor or a company credit card to matter. One Saturday, after class, a teenage boy named Corey waited until everyone else had left to approach me. "You really didn't take the gold?" he asked, his voice quiet, hesitant. I smiled. "No, but for a while, everyone thought I did." He nodded like he was storing that information away. "People always believe the first person to point a finger." I nodded. "They do. But truth has a way of lasting longer." He didn't say anything else, just offered a quick nod and left. But it stayed with me. That truth. That weight. When I got home that evening, Marla was in the kitchen lighting candles. She wore one of my old t-shirts and fuzzy socks, and the smell of rosemary chicken drifted through the air. The house felt warmer than usual, though the weather outside had turned brisk. Fall was settling in. Leaves painted the porch gold and crimson. She glanced up and smiled. "Wine's breathing." I grinned. "And here I thought we'd given up on fine dining." "We have," she said. "But we haven't given up on celebrating." I poured the wine, and we sat. Not at opposite ends of the table. Close. Comfortable. We didn't toast. We didn't need to. The clink of our glasses said enough. Later that night, we sat on the couch with our feet tangled under a shared blanket, and I pulled out my phone. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the folder that held the security footage, the video that had flipped everything, the digital receipt of my innocence. Marla noticed. "You still have it?" I nodded. "Yeah." She didn't ask me to delete it. Didn't pressure me. She just leaned her head on my shoulder. "Does it feel like holding on to proof, or holding on to pain?" I stared at the file name. That timestamp. That frozen image of Ellis stepping into the bank, unaware that one day this would all unravel. Then I deleted it. Not out of forgiveness. Out of closure. "What was that?" she asked softly. "Letting go," I said. We spent the weekend at the cabin again, and this time, we brought paints and blank canvases. Marla wanted to try something new, something messy. We ended up laughing more than painting, flicking specks of color across each other's skin like kids. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, but it was ours. Honest. Unfiltered. On the drive back, she turned to me suddenly. "You know, you never stole gold." "I'm aware," I said, half laughing. "But you gave something more valuable." I raised an eyebrow. "You gave truth," she said. You saved me from believing a lie that could have rotted me from the inside. I didn't know what to say. So I reached over and took her hand. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the real treasure wasn't in a vault or behind a lockbox. Maybe it wasn't stamped with serial numbers or tied to market value. Maybe it was this, a clean name, a story told in full, a life rebuilt without apology. The gold that was taken didn't belong to me, but what I gained in its place, that was worth more than anything they could have buried. Marla squeezed my hand, and we kept driving toward a quieter life, towards something we wouldn't have to defend to anyone, something that didn't need to glitter to be real.